Okay, so we finished the updates to the podcast studio upstairs. So let me kind of go show you what we did and how the setup actually is. So here it is, little attic space in the garage that we turned into the podcast studio for the Wealth Labs podcast with Garrett. Now, when we first kind of were approached by Garrett to do this, the first question was, is the space usable for the podcast? And really, whenever you're setting up your own podcast studio, location is the number one thing that you need to pay attention to. Now, in this case, it's just really an attic that did some staining and stuff to make it look nice and presentable. But most of this stuff isn't on camera. The on-camera part that's really important, when we first were approached, everybody kind of wanted the podcast studio to be pushed up against this wall with the chairs here and cameras there. Our issue with that is you don't create any depth. Depth is super important. It just makes things look bigger, makes things look more professional, allows for backlight, and backlight's gonna create a lot more separation. We'll talk about lighting next. So we opted for shooting it this direction to where we could have you can do a logo, you can do a colored wall, whatever you want behind you, but being able to keep at least 6 feet of depth from where the individual will be and where the background is. It just is gonna create more separation. It's gonna allow the eye to be able to focus on the people and not the wall. So from there, we moved into, okay, cool, now that we've got that set up, again, talking about our number one focus, which is location, where do the cameras go? In this case, we wanted a usable place for Garrett and his team where they could use it, they could walk around when we're not filming. But when we are filming, it's pretty easy that we just got them stored up here, and here comes down the camera. And it's right into its position. We've got it set up to where once you drop it down full 2 lengths, it's exactly the height that we need it at. Again, trying to limit the margin for error so that if our team is no longer filming it, anybody else who can learn the process can come in here and replicate the system by this height is always going to be the same as long as you drop the 2 guys. We taped the 3rd one so that no one can do it because then it would be way too low. What is this? This is a monopod leg. And all we did is we just strapped it up to the top and then put a mount here. That's it, really simple. With this guy, we can record all of the cameras and audio into one device instead of recording to 4 different devices. So just trying to reduce the margin of error or the potential for error. Now in this case, to be able to make things even easier, so it's more of a flip of the switch type system, we've routed everything into one outlet. So they come in, they flip that switch, and there we go. It turns on all of our lights, gives power to all of our cameras, and then all they have to do is turn this guy on with this button press and turn this guy on with that button press, and there you go. You're ready to set up. On the cameras, we set up little guide hints, which help a person see, here's your line guides, and when the person's face is on the camera, where should that top line be? Labels are super important. So we have each camera labeled with what camera it is, and then we have the cables that go up to a converter unit. The converter units are labeled. HDMI has some issues when you run long distances, so we buy like a $35 HDMI to SDI converter, and we convert that video signal, but those are labeled. Then when our cables come down, on the back side of them going into this unit, they're all labeled with the exact same number, camera 1, camera 1. That way it just makes it easy for troubleshooting if issues start to arise. Same thing with the microphones. So these are the Rode Pod mics. We have 4 of them to be able to do up to 4 people. Great, inexpensive mic, relatively speaking. These are about $100 each, and they perform great. They do have a very definite like podcast sound, in my opinion, which means it just kind of sounds a little more compressed, a little boomier of a voice. You know, kind of like AM radio. It's got that kind of grungy, in a good way. I don't know how to describe it, but that's kind of how I perceive it. Great mics for doing a podcast. I don't know if I'd use them for doing anything else in terms of like recording a studio album, but every mic has its own purpose, and these pod mics work great for podcasts. We have them on top of these cool little stands. At first, we were trying to do, you've probably seen it if you're trying to build your own podcast studio, like the little arm things that move around. And just when we were trying to get 4 on here, all you could see was a bunch of arms going everywhere, and it looked disorganized. We tried hanging them from the ceiling, and it just looked like craziness. So we decided to go for the simplicity of these guys. These are Gator Frameworks weighted mic stands. They're just these short little mic stands that have a nice weight on them, and it just allows you to put it on the table, get it really close. We can take it off quickly. In this case, we just have 2 on the table. And then, if we're having someone else show up, it's really quick just to grab it, throw it up there, and boom, you've got the other mic. It's important when you're doing your podcast to have headphones, especially if you have guests who aren't very used to talking on a podcast. The headphones allow them to hear themselves, and they can meter themselves in terms of how loud they should talk. You'll find that if you don't let people hear themselves while they're recording and they're not used to it, they'll often end up over here talking and the mic's not picking them up. Versus when they can hear themselves, they realize, oh, I gotta go closer. Yeah, then we just got some XLR cables. You don't have to get anything special. For the most part, any XLR cable will do. We'll put a link in the description for the ones that we typically buy, because they've worked really great for us on this type of production as well as our film production sets. And then we run it over into the next important part, which is the mixer. So this is called the Rodecaster, made by the same company who made the microphones. This is just a simple 4-way input mixer, so you can control your dials here. This just allows you to individually control your inputs. Garrett has a very loud, boomy voice, so we keep him a little lower. His guests sometimes are a little quiet, so we can take them up higher. And then we just have someone who is sitting here manning the audio. If you don't have other people who can man the audio, what you can do is usually you find your levels beforehand, or some people will keep this over on the desk. So as they're talking, they're able to be presenting the podcast and controlling their levels as well. What's nice about this one is we can mute inputs that aren't being used. So for example, if we've got just the 2 mics going, we'll mute the other mics. We are able to have audio input. If you want, you can have like cell phone input for music. You can have a Bluetooth input if you want to do like a phone call and be like, hey, we've got caller number whatever on the phone, and you can input that here. And if it's your thing, we didn't buy it for this purpose, you can have like laugh tracks and all that stuff dialed up on these punch pads. This is about $500 or maybe a little more. A little more on the expensive side. You can find some cheaper solutions, but this one worked great for us, and that's it. We've got our 4 mics running into here, and then we record from here. Okay, so with lighting, never use the house lights. These look great, especially when you're here in person, but it looks bad on camera. So we built it to where you turn off the house lights and we have complete control over the lighting for the setup. We wanted to have a little more contrast than what a normal podcast studio looks like. I feel like a lot of podcasts are just too lit and feel very flat. Our team, we like depth. It kind of makes it feel a little warm, makes it feel a little more intriguing and professional. So with that, our first focus was being able to get a decent soft light. So we did that through using these quasar tubes. These are 2-foot quasar tubes, very inexpensive. They're about $75 for these 2-foot tubes. They produce a lot of really great light, and in this case, we are bouncing them off just a cardstock. This is like $1 cardstock that you buy at the dollar store. This stuff, pure white, looks great. It gives a nice, soft, reflective bounce, and it's gonna give a really nice, subtle fill to the face. We're doing that because we're trying to reduce the shadows so the shadows feel a lot more soft, and it just looks more presentable. Again, just a quasar tube. We've got one here, one here. This area bounces, and we have the setup for up to 4 people on the podcast. You'll have 2 people sitting here. This is going to cover both their faces in terms of lighting. And then opposite side, this quasar tube will cover the 2 people here. Obviously, if you remove people, then it does about the same thing, where you have one person here, they're getting the same amount of lighting. And so does a really good job of keeping it simple. So that's your first part of lighting setup. $2 that you spend on the foam core, and then, you know, $75 times 2, what is that? I don't know, 150 bucks? 150 bucks for the quasar tubes. And then we just ran some power to it. That was pretty much it, whatever you pay for the extension cords and mounting hardware. Then the second focus was backlight. Now keep in mind, we have our distance, so we want that separation, but how do you create even more distance and separation from the background? Well, you throw a big backlight at it. In this case, we've got 4 different spots. Now the reason why we did 4 is because we could have one point at each individual who was talking. So this one is pointing to the person who will be in the 4th chair, this one's pointing to the person who will be in the 3rd chair, and so on. These guys, these are IntelliTech. We'll put a link in the description. Pretty good lights for the price. I think they were like 100 bucks or 150 each. So more expensive than the quasars, but you can also find different alternatives. Again, this is just a backlight, so it doesn't really matter necessarily what you put back here. I mean, you could probably put like a chicken light if you want to, like those little can lights that you get at Home Depot for $7 and then put a really powerful bulb in it. We just wanted this so it looked a little nice, and this will have a more accurate color output than you would from just like a regular LED light bulb. So these will have a higher CRI, which I believe is color rating index, just meaning that it gives you more accurate colors. We just found a little baby pin mounting plate. All it is a little mounting peg that just goes into light, and then we're able to set it up, adjust it, put it to where we want it to be, and then that's it. Keeps it nice and organized, nice and clean. And then we just route the cables so they aren't sticking out. So that's it. Like that's the technical part. And like once you can get that out of the way and get it organized enough, then you get to focus on the fun part, which is creating good content. That was our goal as we set this up for Garrett, our client. We wanted to make sure that we're not having issues during him filming, that there's not, oh wait, we're having an issue with the audio, or oh wait, we're having an issue with the camera, just trying to get it to where everything is systemized in a way that's not gonna be distracting to the creation of the content. Because in the end, a podcast that has bad content, it doesn't matter how good it looks. So we wanna make sure that there's no distractions for the creation of the content. And that's the beauty of it. So we just arrived at our client's cabin. This is kind of his little sanctuary for filming. And so that's why we decided to put the podcast studio here. When he's on his like retreats with family and stuff, he can sit down, share some words of insights for his YouTube channel, and kind of be at peace. And it is a beautiful, snowy, technically spring day